Hello, this is the walkthrough video for linked node manipulation G. So let's get started by looking at the problem. So we have P.25, .4, So here's a chain of list node objects. So we got the variable P that points to a list node object that has 5 as its data field value. This list node will have a next field that has a reference pointing to this list node object that has 4 as its data field. And this node has a next field that has a reference to this list node object that has 3. And this node's next field has null as its value. All right, so we have this chain. And we want to go to the following state. We want to go P.3, .4, .5. All right, so we're sort of reversing the order of these two nodes in a way. So we got some rules. So first of all, we can't just go in and change the data field value. That means we can't just say this dot data equals 3 and that dot data equals 5. We can't do that. Also, we can't create new list node objects. So we can't just create a new list node that has 3 and replace that here. We can't do that, right? So let's talk about how to approach this problem. So I will switch to the whiteboard view. All right, so let's start by drawing out the initial state of this problem. So we got P, and that pointed to 5. We got a list node object storing 5. So this is kind of how we conventionally draw list node objects in this class. We got a rectangle, we split in half, and on the left side, we put the data field value. And the right side has an arrow. We got 4, 3, and then at the end, if it's a null next field value, we're just gonna put a cross through like that. All right. So there's our initial state, and our final state should be 3, 4, P pointer, 3, 4, 5, and then null. All right, so let's kind of put that there as a reminder. So one key strategy to remember is temp variables. So what that does, so see all these arrows here? So those are all references that point to these list node objects. So the thing about that is at all times, if there are any objects where there are no references that point to it in this diagram, that would mean if there are no arrows pointing to any of these boxes, Java is going to come swoop it up. This is a process called garbage collection. So for example, if we have a process where we get rid of that arrow right there, this 4 is going to get lost because we don't have any reference pointing to it, right? So that means we lose track of these two variables, right, actually. And we need all 3 of these nodes, right, in the final result. So we need to make sure we don't lose track of any nodes. How do we not do that? So say, of course, this isn't part of the actual problem, but just as an example, right? Say we do need to get rid of that arrow. That's not true for this problem, but if we did, if we had a temp variable that pointed to that box and then got rid of it, we do not lose that 4 and hence the 3 node because we can say temp equals 4 and we can say temp.next equals 3. And we successfully got rid of the arrow in that case, that reference in that case. All right. So there's an example of why we would need temp variables. All right. So let's get started on this one. So for this one, I'm going to say because 3 needs to go in the beginning eventually, I'm going to start by making a temp reference to that. So I have a temp variable. So I have a new temp variable that points to P. So P has a reference pointing to here. P dot next points to here. P dot next points to this one. So we can say temp points to the same memory address, the same object that P dot next is pointing to. They're both pointing to that 3 storing node. All right, so our next step is 3 needs to point to 4. So let's just go ahead and do that right now. All right, so we're going to get rid of that arrow. And then we're going to make that 0.24. All right. So how do we represent that? We're going to say temp dot next equals, and how do we represent this? P points to 5, P dot next points to 4. So we're going to say P dot next. All right. One confusing point can be how many nexts do we need? A good rule of thumb is if it's the third node in the chain, for example, it needs 2 nexts. If it's the second node in the chain, it needs 1 next. So it's basically like where it is in the chain minus 1. That's how many nexts you need. That's a good rule of thumb you can remember. So we got temp dot next equals p dot next. So here's our current state of the chain. So next, we want to point this arrow. So we need to get rid of this arrow. We don't want 4.3, but we also need to make 4.5, right? So we're just gonna replace that arrow. And we're gonna say that now points to 5. So how do we represent that in Java? We're gonna say temp dot next equals p, because p straight up points to 5. So this next field is going to point to the same place that p is pointing to, right? So temp dot next equals p. Let's scroll up a little bit just to make a bit more space, right? Next up, we're going to say we want to get rid of this arrow. We don't want 5.4. All right, and we're going to say that's null terminated, which is what we want at the end anyway, right? So that kind of works out. So we're going to say p dot next equals null. All right. So this is kind of what happened to our initial example when I showed why we want temp variables. So we said p dot next equal to null, but 4 did not go away because we indirectly had temp pointing to 3, pointing to 4. So it had a reference pointing to it. So that's why we were able to keep that 4. So our last step is, so notice that we do finally have that 3, 4, 5 chain that we kind of built up through the temp, right? So now we want P to represent this chain. So all we're gonna do is we're gonna say P equals temp. So that means P is going to point to the same place temp is pointing to, like that. So our final result is P point to 3, 3 points to 4, 4 points to 5, 5 points to null. All right, we got our final result. I'm gonna scroll up a little bit. So yep, there's our final result. And notice that it matches our intended result. So I'm gonna go back to ed, and we're just gonna test out that our code works. So we first had p dot next dot next. I'm sorry, list node temp equals p dot next dot next. Next we got said temp dot next equals p dot next, right? And we said temp dot next equals p. Next we said p dot next equal to null, and then lastly we said p equals 10. All right, so I passed the test. All right, that has been question G.